Recently, I watched the documentary series 7 Up, and it made me wonder, what was I like at aged 7? At first, I couldn't really remember much from back then to have an opinion, but then I remembered one event, which, in hindsight, was my first ever solo adventure. And maybe this story does reveal something of my future character and of the person who I was yet to be. This would have been about 1981 when I was 7 years old. I was, of course, living here in the haunted house in Rectory Road, of which I've already told stories about. And when I used to argue with my parents, more probably with my mum because I hadn't tidied up, I sometimes used to threaten to run away and would generally get as far as the telephone box, which used to stand on the corner of Paradise Road and Lodge Road, about 600 feet away from our house, and I would generally stay there and sulk for maybe 30 minutes or an hour, and then would sheepishly make my way back home, hoping the matter would have been forgotten. Then one day, aged 7, I decided not to stop. At first, I don't think I had any idea where I was really going, but pretty soon I decided to walk to my nan's house, some 3.1 miles away. I had memorised the route from being in the back of my dad's car when we used to visit my nan's as a family, but I had never walked it, let alone by myself. Today I'm going to bike it and take you along for the ride and have a reminisce or two along the way. Back in the 1980s, specifically 1981, when I undertook this adventure, there was no path around this humpback bridge. This would have been, for a 7-year-old, the most challenging part of the journey. I'm probably not one to view things too often with rose-tinted glasses, but growing up in Writtle really was quite idyllic. It felt like living in a proper village. Back then, it had backwater vibes. It was more relaxed than most other parts of Chelmsford. Life moved slowly. Everyone knew everyone. People left their doors unlocked. And with certain neighbours, you even let yourself in, with an obligatory knock and a hoo-hoo, anyone home, as you entered. Nowadays, Writtle is just another part of Chelmsford. Maybe with the exception of a few areas around the green which retain a certain village charm. But it doesn't have that small backwater vibes that it once had for me. I'm not sure if that is because the world has got smaller, what with modern travel and instant communication and the like, or whether it is because I have got bigger. One thing I do know is that when I did eventually move from Writtle to the Malbourne estate, the same Malbourne estate where my nan lived, where I'm riding to today in this video, Writtle did feel like a tiny backwater village, and moving to Malbourne almost felt like moving to the city. And that feeling was probably somewhat exaggerated by the fact that Malbourne at the time had a reputation as probably the roughest part of Chelmsford. A reputation it still somewhat retains today, and a reputation that was fought for and hard earned. Whatever was the case, I was most certainly a small fish going into a rather large pond, from being a tadpole in a thimble. Eventually, some hour or so later, I turned up on my nan's doorstep. I'm not sure what I really wanted to achieve, whether I actually intended to move in with my nan or just send a message to my parents. I vaguely remember my nan being a bit shocked and surprised, but also seeing the humour in me running away from home aged 7 and walking all that way. Also, it was a bit more of an innocent time back then, whereas now a 7-year-old walking that distance alone would seem outrageous. My nan would have phoned my neighbours in Writtle, as we didn't have a home phone, and a while later my dad came to pick me up. I don't ever remember being told off for it, and it just became one of those family stories which quickly got forgotten to time. Maybe this adventure does go some way to answer that original question which was asked in the documentary 7 Up. Is someone's character already there on display by aged 7? I still do not know.